So something happened yesterday in the West Bank that most Americans didn't hear about. But an Israeli opposition leader just said something out loud that changes how we understand this whole conflict. And I want to explain why. Before we get into it, drop the country you're watching from in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where everyone's tuning in today. I actually do read them. So here's what happened. Yesterday, July 24th, in a Palestinian town called Tal, near Nablus, in the occupied West Bank, an attack. 4 Palestinians dead, 2 Israelis dead. Soldiers on the ground, chaos. Families grieving on both sides. That's the headline version. But the part that actually matters didn't happen on the ground. It happened in a television studio hours later, when a man named Yair Golan looked straight into a camera and accused Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, of something that's been whispered in Israeli military circles for months. He said Israeli soldiers are paying the price for Netanyahu's reckless policies. Now I'm going to explain what that really means. Because in Israel, you don't just say that about a sitting prime minister. Not lightly. Not without knowing what you're doing. Golan is the opposition leader. He's a former general. He knows the military. He knows the cost of war. And when he says troops are paying the price, he's not talking about something abstract. He's talking about real soldiers, real families, real body bags. Let me back up for a second. You need to understand who Yair Golan is. He's not some fringe activist. He's not a protester on the street. This is a guy who served as Israel's deputy chief of staff, second highest ranking military officer in the entire country. He's been in combat. He's made decisions that got people killed. He knows exactly what he's accusing Netanyahu of. And that's why this hit so hard. So what did Golan actually say? I want to walk you through his words because the phrasing is everything. He said Netanyahu's government has turned the West Bank into a powder keg. That's the phrase he used. A powder keg threatening Israel's security. Not the Palestinians' security, Israel's. Think about that. He's saying the Prime Minister's own policies are making Israel less safe. Not more safe, less. And then he said something even more direct. He said the government has abandoned Israeli soldiers in the West Bank. Abandoned them. That's a heavy word. You don't use that lightly in Israel. The military is sacred there. It's the one institution that binds the country together, left and right, religious and secular. So when a former general says soldiers have been abandoned, that's not political theater. That's an indictment. Now here's where it gets interesting. Golan didn't stop at criticism. He made a promise, a threat, depending on how you hear it. He looked at the camera and said, Netanyahu, we are coming to replace you in the elections. That's not a political soundbite. That's a declaration of war. political war, but war nonetheless. So the question sitting in front of us right now is, why now? Why did Golan choose yesterday to say this? What changed? Let me explain the context, because this is where most American coverage gets shallow. The West Bank has been simmering for months, years really. But in the last 6 months, something shifted. The Israeli government, under Netanyahu's coalition, has been pushing harder. More settlements, more checkpoints, more military operations in Palestinian areas. The far-right ministers in his cabinet, they've been demanding a heavier hand. And the military establishment has been pushing back, quietly, privately. But everyone in the room knew it was happening. Generals don't like politicians who put soldiers in danger for political points. That's universal. But in Israel, it's particularly charged because every single person knows someone who served, someone who fought, someone who died. And here's what makes me genuinely frustrated as someone watching this from the outside. The American media, they cover this like it's a routine conflict, like it's just another day in the Middle East. But it's not routine. What happened in Tal yesterday, it's a direct result of choices made in Jerusalem. Choices made by politicians who aren't the ones in the field, who aren't the ones taking fire. Let's talk about the attack itself for a minute. July 24th, Tal, near Nablus. The details are still coming in, but here's what we know. 4 Palestinians killed, 2 Israelis killed. The exact sequence, it's contested. It always is. But the point Golan was making isn't about who shot first or who bears more blame. His point was about the environment that made this inevitable. He called the West Bank a powder keg, and powder kegs don't explode by accident. They explode because someone keeps striking matches. Now ask yourself this. Why would a former general choose this moment to break ranks so publicly? Because he sees something coming, and he's trying to wake people up before it's too late. I want to dig into the phrase reckless policies for a second, because that word reckless, it's doing a lot of work. Reckless doesn't mean mistaken. It doesn't mean you made a bad call under pressure. Reckless means you knew the risk and you did it anyway. You ignored the warnings. You dismissed the experts. And in this case, the experts are the military commanders on the ground. The same commanders who've been telling Netanyahu for months that the West Bank strategy is unsustainable. Golan was one of those commanders. He knows exactly what the military advised. He knows what was ignored. And now he's saying it out loud for the whole country to hear. But here's the thing. This isn't just about Israel. It's about the United States, too. Because the Biden administration, and now whatever administration we're in, depending on when you're watching this, has been trying to manage this conflict for decades. Every president says they're going to solve it. None of them do. But they all pour money in. They all provide military support. They all give diplomatic cover. And that means American taxpayers are funding some of these reckless policies. not directly, but indirectly, through aid, through weapons, through diplomatic support at the UN. So when an Israeli opposition leader says his own government is endangering its soldiers, that should make Americans ask a question. What are we supporting? What are we connected to? Let me pause here and just be real with you for a second. I'm not anti-Israel. That's not what this is. I have family who've been to Israel. I've read the history. I understand the security concerns. It's a small country surrounded by enemies. The threats are real. But that's exactly why Golan's words matter. Because he's not an enemy of Israel. He's a patriot. He's a soldier. He's saying from the inside that the current path is dangerous for Israel itself. When a guy like that speaks, you listen. Now let's talk about the political fallout, because this is where it gets explosive. Netanyahu has been holding on to power by a thread for years. His coalition is fragile. It's held together by far-right parties that demand aggressive action in the West Bank. If he doesn't deliver, they pull their support. And if they pull their support, the government collapses. New elections. Golan knows that. Everyone knows that. So when Golan says, "We are coming to replace you in the elections," he's not just making noise. He's signaling to the Israeli public that there is an alternative that looks at the military and says, "We will not sacrifice you for political survival." That's a powerful message in a country where everyone serves. But here's what almost every American outlet missed yesterday. Golan didn't just attack Netanyahu's policies. He attacked the entire logic of the current approach. He said the West Bank isn't a security asset. It's a security liability. Think about that. The area that Israel has occupied for 57 years, the area that's supposedly essential for defense, he's saying it actually makes the country less safe. That's a fundamental challenge to the whole settlement enterprise. And that's why this is bigger than just one attack, bigger than one political fight. This is about whether the Israeli right's decades-long project in the West Bank is sustainable, or whether it's creating a trap that will eventually consume the soldiers on the ground, a trap that Golan can see closing. Now, I want you to imagine being an Israeli soldier right now. You're 18, 19, 20 years old. You're on patrol in the West Bank. You know the terrain is hostile. You know there are attacks. You know your commanders are stressed. And then you hear a former general on TV saying your government abandoned you. What does that do to morale? What does that do to trust in leadership? I think that's what Golan is really trying to do here. He's trying to break the trust between the soldiers and the politicians. Because in a democracy, the military has to be apolitical. It has to follow orders. But when soldiers start questioning whether their leaders have their best interests at heart, that's when things fall apart. Let's talk about the timing again. July 24th. Why that day? There's been a pattern over the past year. Every time there's a major incident in the West Bank, Netanyahu's government responds with more force, more operations, more settlements. And every time, the situation gets worse, not better. Golan watched this cycle play out over and over. And yesterday, he decided he wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I want to give you a specific image that Golan's words painted for me. Picture a soldier. Could be Israeli, could be Palestinian, doesn't matter. Picture someone who's 22 years old, exhausted, scared, carrying 30 pounds of gear in 100-degree heat. Picture them looking at a political leader in Jerusalem who's safe, who's air-conditioned, who's never taken fire. And that leader sends them out again, into the same danger, into the same impossible situation. Golan is saying that leader is Netanyahu. And he's saying that leader doesn't care about the cost. Now, you might be watching this thinking, okay, this is an Israeli political fight. Why does it matter to me in America? Fair question. Let me explain. Because the United States is Israel's closest ally. We give them $3.8 billion in military aid every single year. We sell them weapons, we share intelligence, we cover for them at the United Nations. So when Israel's policies become reckless, when they endanger soldiers, when they create a powder keg, that's our investment being put at risk. And here's the thing about powder kegs. They don't just affect the people standing right next to them. Think about what happens if the West Bank explodes. Full-scale intifada, heavy Israeli military response, mass casualties, international condemnation. The United States gets dragged in. We always do. We have to defend Israel at the UN. We have to send emergency aid. We have to manage the diplomatic fallout. And all of that is a distraction from every other problem we're facing. China, Russia, the economy, border security. All of that takes a back seat when the Middle East burns. So yes, this matters to you, even if you've never been to Israel, even if you don't follow Middle East politics. Because American power and American money is tied up in this conflict. And when it goes wrong, we pay the price. Let's go back to Golan's accusation. He said the government turned the West Bank into a powder keg. But who actually lit the fuse? Because a powder keg doesn't explode without someone setting it off. Golan would say Netanyahu lit it by empowering the far right, by ignoring military advice, by prioritizing coalition survival over national security. And I want to pause on that word, national security, because that's what everyone claims they're protecting. Netanyahu says he's protecting Israel. Golan says Netanyahu is endangering it. Same country, same threats, completely different assessments. How do you reconcile that? Here's how. You look at what happened in Tal yesterday. You look at the dead. You look at the grieving families. And you ask yourself, did this have to happen? Was there a different policy that could have prevented it? If the answer is yes, then the people who chose the current policy are responsible. Golan is saying the answer is yes. And that's the thing about leadership. It's not just about making decisions. It's about owning the consequences. Netanyahu wants credit for security, but he doesn't want blame for the price. Golan is forcing the blame onto him, publicly. Now let me read you a line from Golan's statement that really got to me. He said, Israeli soldiers are paying the price, not the politicians, not the cabinet ministers, the soldiers. The ones who don't get a choice, the ones who are drafted, the ones who can't resign. That's what makes this feel so personal. Because the soldiers are the ones who can't walk away. They're stuck. They're in the field. They're taking the fire. And the people who sent them there are sitting in comfortable offices, making decisions based on political calculations. You know, watching this from outside, it's so easy to see the pattern. Politicians everywhere do this. They send young people to dangerous places. They talk about honor and duty. And then they vote themselves more power, more money, more years in office. The soldiers are the ones who pay. Golan is calling that out in real time on national television. Now here's the part that makes me genuinely nervous about where this goes. Golan didn't just criticize. He made a direct political threat. We are coming to replace you in the elections. That's not a suggestion. That's a promise to mobilize the entire opposition behind removing Netanyahu from power. And if you know Israeli politics, you know that's not a small thing. Israelis vote. They vote hard. The last 5 elections have been nail-biters. The country is almost exactly split, 50-50. The right and the left are locked in a death struggle. Golan just drew a line in the sand. On one side, Netanyahu's coalition. On the other, everyone who thinks the West Bank strategy is reckless. That's not just a political fight. That's a fight about the soul of the country. And here's what worries me. When a country is that divided, when the military starts taking sides, when former generals start openly attacking the prime minister, that's when institutions weaken. Trust erodes. And the enemy, whoever it is, sees an opportunity. Iran is watching this. Hezbollah is watching. Hamas is watching. Every adversary of Israel is watching this internal fight and wondering if this is the moment to push. That's the danger of Golan's words. Even if they're true, even if he's right, speaking them out loud weakens Israel's deterrence. It shows the world that the country is fractured. It shows the soldiers are demoralized. Now, I'm not saying Golan shouldn't have spoken. I'm not saying he was wrong. But I'm saying the consequences of his words are bigger than he might have intended. Or maybe he intended exactly this. Maybe he wants the world to see the cracks. Maybe he wants Netanyahu to know the game is up. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about the human cost again. because I think we lose that in all the political analysis. 4 Palestinians died yesterday. 2 Israelis died. 6 families. 6 funerals. 6 sets of parents burying their children. Children who would still be alive if there was a different policy, if there was a different attitude on both sides. Golan said the soldiers are paying the price, but Palestinians are paying the price too. Civilians caught in the middle. Checkpoints, settlements, curfews. They're not soldiers. They didn't choose this. They just live there in the powder keg. And the irony is, the people dying are almost never the ones who made the decisions. They're not the politicians in Jerusalem. They're not the far-right activists in the settlements. They're regular people who woke up that morning expecting to survive the day. And then they didn't. I want to be careful here. I'm not equating the two sides. I'm not saying there's moral equivalence. The history is complicated. The grievances are deep. But the human cost is real on every side. And Golan's point, his real point, is that the current approach multiplies that cost. More violence, more death, more cycles of revenge. And for what? What has the current policy actually achieved? Has it made Israel safer? Has it brought peace closer? Has it improved the lives of anyone involved? Golan's answer is no, on every count. And he's got the military experience to back it up. You know what makes me angry about coverage of this? The American media treats it like an abstract debate. 2 politicians arguing, like it's a football game. It's not a football game. It's life and death. Real people, real blood, real grief. Golan was talking about soldiers who are alive right now, who are in the field right now, who are going to wake up tomorrow and go on patrol, knowing their commander-in-chief doesn't have their back, knowing their prime minister cares more about his coalition than their safety. That's what reckless policies means. It means the leader doesn't care about the cost because he won't pay it. Now let me walk through the Israeli political calculus for a minute, because this is going to shape what happens next. Netanyahu is in a tough spot. His coalition includes some of the most far-right figures in Israeli history. They want more settlements. They want more military operations. They want annexation. If Netanyahu gives in to them, he alienates the center and the left. If he resists them, they collapse his government. He's been dancing between these pressures for months. But Golan just called out the dance. He named the music. He forced people to look at the floor. And the floor is covered in blood. The question now is whether Netanyahu changes course, whether he pulls back, whether he listens to the generals. And I got to be honest with you, I don't think he will. He's been in power too long. He's too invested in his own survival. He's built his entire career on being the tough guy who protects Israel. He can't pivot now without admitting he was wrong. and his ego won't allow that. So the powder keg stays. The fuse stays lit. The soldiers stay in harm's way. And that means more attacks, more dead, more families shattered on both sides. This is one of those moments where you wish politicians would just stop, take a breath, look at the bodies, look at the grief, and ask themselves if it's worth it, if the political points are worth the human cost. But they don't. They never do. They just double down. They send more soldiers. They build more settlements. And the cycle continues. Let me bring this back to you, because this is the part of the show where I always ask, what does this have to do with me? And the answer is more than you think. The United States has been the broker in this conflict for 70 years. We've poured billions in. We've lost diplomats, soldiers, civilians. We've let this conflict consume our foreign policy, distract from our priorities, and tear apart our domestic politics. Israel and Palestine is one of those issues that never goes away. It just waits, and then it explodes again. And every time it explodes, Americans debate it. We fight about it. We take sides. It becomes a partisan issue. It makes us more divided, more angry, more unable to see the other side. Golan's words yesterday, they're going to be quoted in American political debates, on cable news, in think tank reports. And none of that is going to change anything on the ground in the West Bank. None of it is going to save the next soldier. None of it is going to prevent the next attack. But maybe, and this is the hope, maybe it changes something in Israel. Maybe enough voters hear Golan and think, he's right. This isn't working. We need to try something else. That's the power of a single voice. A former general who's willing to break ranks, to risk his political career, to say the thing that everyone was afraid to say. And that's why I wanted to walk you through this. Not because it's a news report, not because it's a gotcha, but because it matters, because it's real, because people are dying, and because, honestly, I think Golan is right. I think Netanyahu's policies are reckless. I think the West Bank is a powder keg. I think the soldiers are paying the price. I think the politicians in Jerusalem aren't paying enough attention. But that's just my opinion. I'm just a guy sitting here talking to you through a screen. You should make up your own mind. Here's what I know for sure, though. This isn't going away. This conflict isn't going to resolve itself. The next attack is going to happen. The next funeral is going to happen. The next political fight is going to happen. And somewhere, another 22-year-old soldier is going to put on their gear and walk into danger because someone in power decided it was worth it. That's the reality Golan was talking about. That's the reality Netanyahu is responsible for. And that's the reality we all have to live with, whether we're Israeli, Palestinian, or American. So let me end with this. Netanyahu has been prime minister for most of the last 16 years. He's survived scandals. He's survived indictments. He's survived election after election. But yesterday, Yair Golan said something that might be harder to survive than anything that's come before. He said Netanyahu is endangering Israel's future. He said the soldiers have been abandoned. He said the West Bank is a threat, not a shield. And then he said, "We're coming to replace you." That's not just a political statement. That's a verdict. And the question now is, who is the Israeli public going to believe? The prime minister who says he's keeping them safe, or the former general who says the opposite? Because in a country where everyone serves, I think I know which way the wind is blowing. And honestly, I think that's a good thing, a healthy thing. When leaders stop being accountable, when they stop listening to the experts, when they stop caring about the soldiers they send to die, the people need to step in. That's what Golan is trying to do. He's trying to give the people a reason to step in. Now, I don't know what comes next. I don't know if Netanyahu falls. I don't know if the West Bank gets quieter or louder. I don't know if there's a path to something different. But I do know that what happened yesterday, the attack in Tal, the deaths, the accusation from Golan, it's a turning point, a real one. And in a few months, we're going to look back and see this as the moment something cracked, the moment the political consensus fell apart, the moment the soldiers started asking questions their commanders couldn't answer. So here's my final thought for you today. Keep watching this. Pay attention. It's not a distant conflict. It's a crack in the foundation of the Middle East. And when the foundation goes, the whole region shakes. And America gets shaken with it. Stay aware, stay engaged, and maybe, just maybe, remember that the people paying the price are just people. Soldiers on both sides, families on both sides, human beings who deserve better than what their leaders are giving them. That's it. That's what I wanted to explain to you today. This isn't over. It's never over in that part of the world. But you understand it a little better now. That's the point. Whew. Okay. I'll see you in the next one. We've got a lot more to get through.